So, for our final presentation, we're going to be discussing George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Our argument is that our people easily controlled and manipulated by higher authorities such as the government. In our project, we will address this in different ways regarding the book Animal Farm. The Russian Revolution was a time of political and social upset that occurred during the First World War. However, in the book, everything got started when Jones went to bed and didn't feed the animals. The animals got sick of this and wanted to stand up for themselves. In a fictional way, the Animal Farm is a story about the Russian Revolution. The author George Orwell resembles the beginning of the Russian Revolution by presenting actual events from real life. The setting where the animals rebel against Farmer Jones is very much like the people of Russia when they oppose their emperor Nicholas II. Mr. Jones is designed according to Tsar Nicholas II, the last Russian emperor. His reign from 1894 to 1917 was set apart by his emphasis on being one of the country's uncontestable rulers. The Russian people went through terrible poverty and chaos under his rule, just like the animals in the book under Jones, because they were not cared for and were only used to benefit Jones. As a result, their lives got worse, and they came to the conclusion that they could do better if they were in charge, just like the people of Russia did during the revolution. The leader of the animals, Old Major, represents Vladimir Lenin in real life. Vladimir Lenin was a Russian progressive government official and political scholar. Lenin was the leader of the Radical Social Bolshevik Party from 1917 to 1924. He was the first founding head of government in Soviet Russia. Lenin was inspired by Karl Marx's theory of communism, which urges the workers of the world to unite against their economic opposers. Old Major outlines the principles of animalism and theory that holds all animals are equal, and this starts the beginning of the Russian Revolution against their opposers. Major, who stands for Marx and Lenin at the same time, is the inspiration for the ideals that the animals keep up even after the pig's leader betray them. Orwell incorporates a couple of little incongruents that permit the pursuers to scrutinize the respect of the pigs throughout the process.
Now that we've talked about a little bit of the revolution, we're going to talk about what the impact of the revolution was on Russia. Once the revolution took its place, it paved the way for communism, and it became a large power vacuum. Now that the last of the empires were gone, those who weren't noble or had noble blood were allowed to take some power. Lenin, who was one of the most biggest advocates for the revolution, eventually seized power in 1918, but he later dies in 1924 brain disease. However, during this rule, he often provided a lot of positions for one of his closest followers, Stalin. And Stalin very quickly rise from the ranks from like a low officer to a much higher and politically influential person. Once Lenin died from his brain disease, Stalin quickly gained and grabbed the positions of General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the USSR and Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR. With these statuses and positions, Stalin pretty much controlled Russia, and he used this unlimited power to repress the people. He used this power to create strict policies and create a very communist nation. This now highlights how our argument that people are easily manipulated, because Stalin was able to manipulate not only Lenin, and the governors and leaders in Russia, but the people to give him power and allow him to use that power to repress them. And this brings me to the quote on the slide. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make decisions yourselves. But sometimes you might make the wrong decision, comrades, and where would you be? This quote highlights the effect of the revolution because leaders in Russia, whether an emperor or a dictator, will not allow people to make their own choices. It also highlights the argument for people being easily controlled or manipulated because they believe that leaders allow people to believe that they are dangerous not only to others but to themselves. And without repression, the country would fall into complete chaos. Stalin didn't not just manipulate the people, but pretty much everyone around him.
So the aftermath of the Russian Revolution starts in 1923 when the USSR was created, which paved the way for the rise of communism, first in Russia and would later be spread to countries all across the globe. Communism is essentially eliminating all social classes and lets everyone be equal on the same ground floor and allows them to work their way up from scratch. But there are some pretty major issues revolving around the fact that the government owns all property, which can very quickly lead to totalitarianism for government because they own the places where you live, where you work, and can set major restrictions on your way of surviving, which is very dangerous to give the government all that power because it leads to too much uncertainty in your life that you really can't control. And we've seen communism stand today in countries like Cuba, North Korea, and China, which are countries that aren't really high on the human rights charts across the world. So it hasn't really been successful for the most part, and it practically is impossible to have a positively functioning communist society in today's world. And that's mainly because capitalism already exists in today's world. So there is really no way that everybody can go back to just starting with nothing because there's already stuff to have. So you would need a clean society that has pretty much had their brains washed and no sorts of vendettas for this to work. The fall of the Berlin Wall was on November 9th, 1989, which was a triumphant day for the world against communism because it kept all Germans inside, and if they were ever tried to escape, they would be killed on that same spot, which is very similar to the way that North Korea is functioning currently. The collapsing of the wall later led to the demise of communism in Russia on December 26, 1991, when the dismemberment of the Soviet Union was made official. And this really connects well with our argument of Orwell, because he's saying that it might sound like a good idea for a little bit, but there's always someone that is going to have that vendetta saying, yeah, I want everyone to be equal, but I don't want to lose my power and what I've achieved to be able to make that equality happen, which is kind of like in this quote where it's all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than the others.
So, for the next part of our presentation, we're going to be discussing the effect of the Russian Revolution in the context of Animal Farm. The story Animal Farm can be categorized as an allegory, which is a story that has a hidden meaning. And in this case, it's demonstrating the Russian Revolution and the impacts of a corrupt government. So, the farm that the animals reside in is a representation of Russia during the revolution. And this farm was run by a corrupt leader that they pushed out. And Old Major was the one who inspired them to rebel. And in this context, he represents Karl Marx. His dream mentioned in the beginning represents Marx's Communist Manifesto. Napoleon, the leader, represents the tyrannous Joseph Stalin. Snowball represents the revolutionary Leon Trotsky, and Boxer is a representation of the entire working class in Russia during the revolution in 1917. So while this work is an allegory of Russia, it's also a dystopia, which can be defined as a story that demonstrates a world much worse than our current society. And what Orwell's trying to convey is what can happen if the government goes unchecked and remains corrupt.
Thomas Hobbes was known as an early modern English political philosopher who saw the government as a mere security to the collective people of society. Hobbes is well known especially for his idea of social contract, which argued that there should be an agreement between the people and its government. This social contract is represented in Hobbes' work known as the Leviathan. The front piece of Leviathan is depicted on the left of the slide, which shows a man wielding a sword and crosier, which is a styled staff. The man in this picture is the ruler of the people, and he symbolizes multiple things, such as legitimacy, power, and control of the church. His depiction is Hobbes' representation of the ideal government, as he is made up of the people, which presents the idea of security and social contract. Without such a contract, Hobbes argues that the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Animal Farm upholds such a quote for the animals of the farm by reframing it in the book as miserable, laborious, and short. This illustrates that the animals lack a social contract with Jones, allowing for abuse and ominous control. When the people are unhappy with their institutions, it is argued by Hobbes that it is their natural right to take over their leaders and introduce a new form of rule. In the same token, Hobbes depicts the animals taking over the farm and claiming peace as a supportive evidence of this idea. The animals then agreed to make some form of a social contract where they give up some of their rights for the sake of peace. The animals in Orwell's book present no different behaviors or actions than our own history shows. Such as in the Russian Revolution, people tend to rise up against abusive power and recall for social reform. Another notable historical figure of our time is Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli was a philosopher from Florence, Italy. He was well known for his cynical ideas of dictator rule. According to Machiavelli, the perfect ruler was one who is willing to do anything for the good of the state. This meant that one must be willing to be feared but loved by the people in order to hold control. Machiavelli set several examples for ways to hold fear, such as publicly supporting Cesare Borgia, the Duke at the time. In Machiavelli's work, called The Prince, he states that the Duke's public execution of enemies was a vital way to gain people's fear. These violent testaments from Machiavelli made him known as ruthless. George Orwell presents examples of Machiavelli's political ideology through Napoleon, who was a tyrant over the animals of the farm. Napoleon was widely feared on the farm, and he slowly established himself to the animals in a way that made him as scary as he was loved. For example, Napoleon follows the same tactics as Cesare Borgia by using his brutal dogs to publicly kill what he perceived to be traitors of the farm. In the same token, he reminded the animals that they were dependent on him and that they should be scared of crossing him in any way. Napoleon said to his animals that it is for your sake that we drink that milk and eat those apples. He establishes dependency and puts fear into the mind of the animals, giving him further control over them. This is exactly what the Duke did to remind the people of his power, and it is what Machiavelli argues as the ideal way to rule.
For our discussion questions portion of the Orwell presentation, the first question was, why did the author make the reader sympathize with every animal except the pigs, even though they were the most intelligent animals in the farm? The reason Orwell made the reader sympathize with every animal except the pigs is to highlight the dangers of political power and how it can corrupt even the most well-intentioned and intelligent leaders. By portraying the pigs as power-hungry and selfish, the author illustrates how even the most educated leaders and individuals can become blinded by their own ambition and lose sight of their original goals. So this is more of a cautionary tale being told to the readers, describing the dangers of political power and the importance of the distribution to the masses in a democracy. The second question that we decided on was, how has the new commandment, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, been true throughout the whole book, even though they previously stated that the 7 commandments were followed by all? Throughout the book, the pigs slowly and steadily gain power and begin to manipulate the other animals, using propaganda and deception to maintain their hold over the farm. Although the original 7 commandments established by the animals proclaimed that all animals were equal, the pigs gradually changed and twisted their interpretation of the commandments to suit their own interests. For example, when the pigs start to live in the farmhouse, they justify it by saying that the house is merely a tool to help them run the farm more efficiently. However, they later just changed the commandment to no animals shall sleep in a bed to no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets, thus justifying their use of the farmhouse beds. The pigs gradually increase their privileges and power over time while reducing the rights and freedoms of the other animals. They begin to walk on 2 legs, wear clothes, and even drink alcohol, all of which were previously prohibited. They also establish a hierarchy of power with the pigs at the top and the other animals subservient to them. Thus, even though the animals initially believed that the 7 commandments were being followed by all, the pigs gradually and systematically violated them. And here are our references.